August 6, 1945, 08:15 hours, Imperial General Headquarters, Tokyo. A single decoded transmission from Hiroshima would shatter 3 years of carefully constructed assumptions about American industrial power. What Japanese High Command read in that message would force them to confront a truth they had denied since Pearl Harbor. America hadn't been fighting at full capacity. They had been warming up. The basement war room beneath the Imperial Palace sat 90 feet underground, insulated by reinforced concrete walls 4 feet thick. On the morning of August 6, 1945, the space hummed with the familiar rhythm of a losing war. Field reports processed, supply shortages calculated, defensive positions adjusted. Field Marshal Shunroku Hata's morning intelligence briefing had become a ritual of managed decline. At precisely 08:15 hours, Communications Officer Lieutenant Colonel Takeshi Yamamoto burst through the steel door without the customary bow. In his hands, he carried a decoded transmission that would fundamentally alter how Japan's military leadership understood the war they had been fighting. The message was fragmentary, transmitted by the Hiroshima Regional Military Command before all communication ceased. Entire city destroyed by single bomb. Blast radius exceeds all previous bombardment. Unknown weapon type. Casualties catastrophic. Request immediate. The transmission ended mid-sentence. General Yoshijiro Umezu, Chief of the Imperial General Staff, read the message 3 times. His first assumption was that American B-29s had conducted the largest conventional bombing raid of the war, perhaps 500 aircraft dropping incendiaries simultaneously. The mathematics seemed impossible otherwise. Hiroshima was a city of 350,000 people spread across 27 square miles. But additional reports arriving throughout the morning told a different story. Weather reconnaissance had logged only 3 B-29s over Hiroshima that morning. 3 aircraft. Not 300. 3. Admiral Suemu Toyoda, Chief of the Naval General Staff, stood at the massive wall map tracking every known American military asset in the Pacific. His intelligence staff had become exceptionally skilled at predicting American operations. They knew bomber formations, typical ordnance loads, expected damage patterns. Nothing in 3 years of air war suggested 3 aircraft could erase an entire city. The first assumption collapsed. This was not a conventional raid. By 10 o'clock hours, reconnaissance flights attempting to reach Hiroshima reported something unprecedented. Pilots described a mushroom-shaped cloud rising over 40,000 feet, visible from 150 miles away. The cloud glowed with colors they had never seen, purples and oranges that seemed to pulse with internal light. The second assumption collapsed. This was not any known weapon. Foreign Minister Shigenori Togo received the first eyewitness account at 11:30 hours from a railway official who had been 15 miles outside Hiroshima. The man's testimony, recorded by Togo's secretary, described a flash brighter than 1,000 suns, followed by a pressure wave that knocked trains off their tracks. The entire city center had simply vanished, replaced by a firestorm visible from the mountains. The third assumption collapsed. American propaganda had been understatement, not exaggeration. The afternoon meeting of the Supreme War Council convened at 1400 hours in complete silence. Prime Minister Kantaro Suzuki, who had survived multiple assassination attempts for even suggesting peace negotiations, read the accumulated reports with trembling hands. "Gentlemen," Suzuki began, "we must consider what this means." General Korechika Anami, the Minister of War, and the most ardent advocate for continuing the fight, spoke first. "American propaganda. They want us to believe they possess weapons they do not have. Hiroshima was destroyed by conventional bombing, and they are using deception to—" 3 aircraft. "Anami-san," Admiral Toyoda interrupted, something he would never have done in normal circumstances. "Our radar tracked them. Our observers watched them. 3. The room fell silent as the implications settled over them like volcanic ash. The final assumption, that they understood the limits of American capability, collapsed without ceremony. For 3 years, Japanese military doctrine had been built on a single premise: American industrial might could be overcome by Japanese spiritual strength and tactical innovation. But a single bomb that could destroy a city suggested something far more troubling. It suggested that American industrial and scientific capacity had reached levels that made Japanese resistance not merely difficult, but meaningless. Intelligence officer Colonel Hideo Sato presented the afternoon's analysis at 1600 hours. Voice barely above a whisper. If the Americans can destroy entire cities with single bombs, then they possess scientific capabilities that render numerical comparisons meaningless. They are not fighting the same war we are fighting. Foreign Minister Togo added what everyone was thinking, but no one wanted to say. And if they have one such bomb, we must assume they have more. The message that should not exist had arrived, and with it, the war Japan thought it was fighting ceased to exist as well. Before we continue, click that subscribe button, like this video, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. It brings me great joy knowing that these war stories and lessons get to people all over the world. Your support helps us bring more thrilling war stories, and trust me, you won't want to miss them. Now, let's get back to the story. The Japanese understanding of American power had been shaped by a series of carefully constructed beliefs that began long before Pearl Harbor. These beliefs, documented in countless staff meetings and strategic assessments, would all collapse within days of Hiroshima. But to understand what the High Command finally realized, one must first understand what they had convinced themselves was true. In November 1941, Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, commander of the Combined Fleet, had provided the most accurate assessment of American industrial capacity that any Japanese leader would offer during the entire war. His warning, recorded in naval staff minutes, was explicit. "I can run wild for 6 months or a year, but I have utterly no confidence for the 2nd or 3rd year." Yamamoto had lived in America. He had studied at Harvard and served as naval attaché in Washington. He had toured American factories and witnessed the industrial infrastructure firsthand. His calculations were not based on hope or nationalist fervor, but on cold mathematics. America's steel production alone exceeded Japan's total industrial output. American petroleum reserves were effectively unlimited compared to Japan's precarious dependence on imports. But Yamamoto's warnings were systematically ignored by the very staff now sitting in the underground bunker, contemplating Hiroshima's destruction. The Army's strategic planning documents from 1941, recovered from archives after the war, revealed the alternative narrative that military leadership had embraced. American industrial might would be neutralized by 3 factors. First, distance. Japan's conquests would secure a defensive perimeter so vast that American logistics would collapse under its own weight. Every ship, every aircraft, every bullet would need to travel 5,000 miles across hostile ocean before reaching combat. Japan could sustain its forces from nearby conquered territories while America exhausted itself in futile supply chains. Second, morale. American society was soft, individualistic, incapable of sustaining heavy casualties. Japanese military doctrine assumed that after losing 30,000 to 40,000 men, American public opinion would demand peace negotiations. The Japanese soldiers' willingness to die would outlast America's willingness to fight. Third, tactical superiority. Japanese forces, through superior training, warrior spirit, and tactical innovation, would inflict casualty ratios that made American numerical advantages irrelevant. 1 Japanese soldier would equal 3 to 4 Americans in combat effectiveness. These assumptions had been tested and found wanting at every single engagement of the Pacific War. Yet Japanese High Command had consistently reinterpreted defeats as validation of their theories needing minor adjustments rather than fundamental revision. At Midway in June 1942, Japan lost 4 aircraft carriers in a single day. The official assessment blamed bad luck and tactical errors. not American cryptographic superiority or the fundamental vulnerability of Japan's carrier-focused strategy. The underlying assumption that Japanese forces could overcome numerical disadvantages remained intact. At Guadalcanal from August 1942 to February 1943, Japanese forces discovered that Americans could sustain logistics across vast distances and could match Japanese soldiers in jungle warfare. The official assessment blamed local commanders for insufficient fighting spirit, not the impossibility of the strategic situation. The underlying assumption that American society would crack under sustained casualties remained intact. By August 1945, every major assumption had been systematically demolished by reality, yet senior leadership had never formally acknowledged this. General Anami's continued advocacy for fighting to the last citizen represented not stupidity, but the logical endpoint of beliefs that had never been properly questioned. The illusions hadn't merely failed, they had become articles of faith, and faith, by definition, does not require evidence. The afternoon of August 6th marked the first time in the entire war that Japan's Supreme War Council confronted their illusions directly. Intelligence Colonel Hideo Sato presented what he called the reality assessment, a document his team had compiled over the previous 6 months but had been prevented from presenting until now. The numbers were devastating. American aircraft production in 1944 alone exceeded Japan's total production for the entire war. American shipyards were building escort carriers faster than Japan could train pilots. American ammunition factories produced more shells in a week than Japan's factories produced in a month. But Sato's most damning statistics involved scientific research. His intelligence network had documented American research facilities employing over 130,000 scientists and engineers working on military technology. Japan's comparable effort employed approximately 6,000. American research universities, Harvard, MIT, Berkeley, Chicago, had larger physics departments than Japan's entire scientific community. The atomic bomb, Sato explained, voice steady but quiet, required facilities that we could not have built even if we had known how. He placed reconnaissance photographs on the table, aerial images captured by neutral diplomatic sources over the previous 2 years, images that intelligence analysts had flagged but leadership had dismissed. The Americans constructed entire cities in secret: Oak Ridge, Tennessee, Hanford, Washington, Los Alamos, New Mexico. His finger traced each location. These facilities consumed more electricity than major Japanese cities. They employed 130,000 workers. The Manhattan Project cost $2 billion, more than Japan spent on its entire war effort in 1944. Foreign Minister Togo asked the question that would echo through subsequent war crimes trials and historical analysis: how could we not know? Sato's answer was uncomfortable but accurate. We knew, Foreign Minister. Our intelligence services reported on American industrial expansion continuously. We intercepted communications about large-scale secret projects. We documented their scientific recruitment efforts. He paused, but every report was dismissed as exaggeration or propaganda. We chose not to know because knowing would require acknowledging that we could not win. Admiral Toyoda added his own bitter assessment. The Americans fought this war with one hand tied behind their back. They fought Germany and Japan simultaneously while developing weapons we cannot comprehend. They produced more war material than we thought physically possible while maintaining their civilian economy at levels that exceeded peacetime production. He looked around the table, meeting each man's eyes. They are not merely stronger than us. They are operating on a different level of civilization. This admission that America represented not just greater strength but a different category of capability marked the fundamental shift in understanding. For 4 years, Japanese propaganda had portrayed Americans as materialistic and weak, dependent on machines because they lacked spiritual strength. The atomic bomb revealed this narrative as catastrophically wrong. Cabinet Secretary Hisatsune Sakomizu recorded in his diary that evening, "We have been fighting an enemy we never understood. We assumed they thought as we thought, that their society functioned as ours functioned, that their limits matched our limits. Hiroshima proves we were fighting blind. The mathematics were inescapable. One civilization had been fighting total war, mobilizing science, industry, and logistics on a scale that defied comprehension. The other had been fighting on faith, convinced that spirit could overcome steel. Faith had lost, not because it was weak, but because it had been tested against reality, and reality does not negotiate. If you enjoy dramatic, jaw-dropping stories, subscribe to WW2 Archives Declassified. Let's grow this channel to 1,000 subscribers. August 7, 1945 began with reconnaissance photographs that made Hiroshima seem even more incomprehensible. Major Tsuneo Kitamura, the pilot who flew the first successful reconnaissance mission, reported weather conditions he had never encountered. Updrafts so powerful they threw his aircraft 2,000 feet higher in seconds, air temperatures that spiked his instruments, visibility obscured by smoke that rose in a column to the stratosphere. The photographs, developed by 11 o'clock hours, showed something military analysts initially refused to believe. The city center, approximately 4 square miles, had been completely flattened, not destroyed in the conventional sense where rubble and building foundations remained, but flattened to bare earth. Structures had been vaporized. Intelligence analysts compared these images to conventional bombing results. The most devastating conventional raid of the war, the Tokyo firebombing of March 9–10, 1945, had required 334 B-29 bombers, dropping 1,665 tons of incendiaries over 3 hours. Hiroshima's destruction exceeded that devastation, accomplished by a single bomb from a single aircraft in a single instant. The Supreme War Council reconvened at 1400 hours on August 7th, with new intelligence that shattered Japan's final strategic hope. Soviet Foreign Minister Vyacheslav Molotov had summoned Japanese Ambassador Naotake Sato to the Kremlin at midnight Moscow time. The message was brief. The Soviet Union would consider itself at war with Japan, effective August 9, 1945. General Anami's face, according to multiple witnesses, went pale as the implications registered. Japan now faced enemies on all fronts with no prospect of negotiated settlement. American atomic weapons from the east, Soviet armies from the north, British Commonwealth forces from the south, Chinese resistance continuing in occupied territories. The empire that had once stretched from the borders of India to the mid-Pacific was being compressed back toward the home islands with crushing force. Foreign Minister Togo presented the stark reality. We have 3 choices: surrender unconditionally, fight until every city is destroyed by atomic weapons, or fight until Soviet and American forces invade and Japan ceases to exist as a nation. There are no other options. August 8th brought fragmentary intelligence about Soviet movements. The Red Army had launched a massive assault into Manchuria with overwhelming force. The Kwantung Army, once the elite formation of Japanese military power, was being systematically destroyed. Soviet tank columns advanced 50 miles in the first day, encountering resistance that collapsed before forces that had learned their trade, destroying Nazi Germany. At 11:02 hours on August 9th, a second atomic bomb destroyed Nagasaki. The communication from the Nagasaki Regional Command was even briefer than Hiroshima's. Second atomic attack. City destroyed. Casualties catastrophic. Then silence. The Supreme War Council emergency session that afternoon descended into something unprecedented in Japanese military protocol: open acknowledgement of complete strategic failure. Navy Minister Admiral Mitsumasa Yonai spoke with remarkable candor. The Americans have demonstrated that they can destroy our cities at will, one by one, until nothing remains. We cannot defend against weapons we cannot detect until they detonate. Our strategy of fighting to the last citizen assumes Americans must invade to occupy. But if they can destroy cities without invasion, our entire defensive doctrine becomes obsolete. They can simply eliminate Japan from existence without ever setting foot on our soil. Intelligence estimates presented that evening calculated that America likely possessed between 3 and 7 additional atomic bombs, with production capacity for more. Even if this estimate was high, even if America possessed only one more weapon, the strategic implication remained identical. Continued resistance was not heroism, it was suicide. Cabinet Secretary Sakomizu recorded the Emperor's private comments from an audience that evening. His Majesty expressed that the unendurable must be endured. The atomic bombs have demonstrated that continued resistance will result in the complete annihilation of the Japanese people. Every exit had closed, every option had collapsed. What remained was not choice, but acknowledgement. The formal surrender ceremony aboard USS Missouri on September 2, 1945, brought Japanese representatives face to face with the physical manifestation of American power they had consistently underestimated. Foreign Minister Mamoru Shigemitsu, who signed the surrender document, recorded his impressions in his diary. The harbor was filled with American warships as far as one could see. Hundreds of vessels. Aircraft filled the sky in formations that blocked the sun. The Americans displayed their power not through threats, but through simple presence. This armada represented a fraction of their total military force, yet exceeded everything Japan possessed at the peak of our strength. General Yoshijiro Umezu, representing the Imperial General Staff, noted the ceremony's location was itself a lesson in American capability. We surrendered aboard a battleship built in American yards in less time than it took us to plan a single naval operation. The Missouri was one of dozens of capital ships they constructed while simultaneously fighting across 2 oceans and developing atomic weapons. We prepared for war for a decade. They prepared for 15 months and buried us. The American occupation force began arriving in late August, and Japanese military observers documented details that reinforced their new understanding. A single American infantry division moved with more trucks than the entire Imperial Army possessed. American supply operations delivered fresh food to troops while Japanese forces had been starving. American medical facilities treated injuries that Japanese military medicine considered untreatable. Intelligence Colonel Sato compiled his final report in September 1945, titled, "Why We Lost: An Assessment of Strategic Miscalculation." The document, now preserved in Japan's National Institute for Defense Studies, provided brutal honesty. We lost the war in December 1941 when we attacked an enemy we did not understand. Every battle thereafter was simply the working out of inevitable mathematics. American industrial capacity exceeded ours by factors of 10 to 20 in every category. Their scientific establishment was larger than our entire educated population. Their resource base was effectively unlimited, while ours depended on conquests we could not sustain. We fought believing spirit could overcome material. We were wrong. Former Prime Minister Suzuki, in conversations recorded by American occupation historians, articulated what Japanese leadership had finally grasped. We thought we were fighting a nation of merchants who valued profit over honor, comfort over sacrifice. We were catastrophically wrong. We were fighting the most productive civilization in human history, one that could simultaneously sustain mass consumer economy and total war production. They didn't choose between butter and guns. They produced both in quantities we found incomprehensible. The Manhattan Project's details, gradually revealed to Japanese scientists through occupation channels, provided the most humbling lesson. The project had employed 130,000 people and cost $2 billion. It required constructing facilities that consumed more electricity than major cities. It involved theoretical physics at levels Japanese scientists hadn't imagined possible. The atomic bomb wasn't merely a weapon. It was evidence of scientific and industrial capacity that placed America in a different category of civilization. Admiral Toyoda's final assessment, written in 1946 for occupation historians, captured the complete reversal of Japanese military thinking. We began the war believing American democracy made them weak. Their diversity made them disunited. Their wealth made them soft. We ended the war understanding that democracy enabled innovation, diversity provided talent, and wealth funded capabilities we couldn't match. Every assumption we held was not merely wrong, but precisely backwards. By 1947, when American occupation officials conducted comprehensive interviews with former Japanese military leadership, the transformation was complete. General Umezu's testimony summarized what Japanese high command had finally understood. We lost because we never understood our enemy. We attributed to them our weaknesses, limited resources, narrow industrial base, inflexible thinking when they possessed the opposite. We believed our own propaganda when we should have believed our intelligence services. The atomic bomb was not the cause of our defeat. It was the final proof that we had been defeated from the moment we started fighting an enemy we never truly comprehended. He paused, then added the words that would define Japan's reckoning. We learned too late that courage cannot defeat chemistry, spirit cannot overcome steel, and determination means nothing when facing an enemy who possesses both determination and 10 times your capacity to give it physical form. The war. Japan thought it was fighting had never existed, the enemy they imagined had never been real, and the victory they believed possible had been mathematical impossibility from the first shot fired at Pearl Harbor. Understanding came, but it came 4 years, 3 million lives, and 2 atomic bombs too late. Don't just watch, subscribe. Help WW2 Archives Declassified hit 1,000 subscribers.